We got this all set here. I got my sophisticated tea.
Got my nitro cold brew.
Maybe I don't want to show off rep WeWork, otherwise they'll get us on licensing.
I was gonna show always half full.
All right. Harry, I'm super excited for this interview. It's not every day that our firm is adding new talent to the team. As you know, we're a skeleton crew that does a lot. Everybody wears every hat in the firm. And so, again, it's not often that new people are joining our team. And for that reason, I'm super excited to introduce you to our world, to everybody who listens. Excited to dig a bit more into your background. I know I already know a decent amount about you, but usually I find through these interviews, I learn even more. And so with that, we always start with the same question. Harry, can you tell me your life story in 60 seconds or less?
60 seconds is gonna be tough, but I'll give it my best shot. Grew up in New York City, and I would define my early life as one, being obsessive with sports, both playing it and being a fan.
What'd you play?
I played football, basketball, and lacrosse. My main sports, though, were football and lacrosse. And then the other thing was I was kind of obsessed with problem solving. And what that meant was I didn't really like the English history classes, but I was always drawn to math and science. Kind of bridged those two things together in high school, became really obsessed with sports analytics, started my high school sports analytics club and rode that into college, where at Duke, I realized they didn't have a great infrastructure for anything sports analytics. So I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. Ended up enrolling in the economics major. I was like, this is probably pretty applicable to a lot of potential careers. But more importantly, I ended up finding the innovation and entrepreneurship certificate. Was really drawn to that because my dad was a lifelong entrepreneur. I grew up in a household where he was trying to build several businesses. It was there that I was inspired to launch my first business as a freshman. It was a very quick stint. You can ask a little bit more about it later. Then that led to a second business after the first one failed. That one I'm still actively working on, but has lots of twists and turns. Towards the end or the back half of college, I started to think about life outside of the startup that I was working on, which is called Fanful. And I thought no better place to begin a career than a job that worked very closely with startups and, still belong to the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And so I outreached to a bunch of firms. Hey, you looking for full-time analysts? Everyone said no, they didn't need me. But I was particularly drawn to TIA Ventures. I said, hey, look, you can see how I work. I have this summer where I don't even have an internship lined up. See how I work. Maybe this is a match that works for both of us. One thing led to the next, and here I am.
Yeah, the rest is history. One of the people on our team, I think, comically said recently on our Slack channel to you, this was the week after you started, it was Charlie, he said, Harry, how is the first week of the rest of your life going? So that gave me a good chuckle. You just mentioned a bunch of things that I want to kind of dive into. You talked about kind of entrepreneurial DNA in your family, your father. Sounds like a few different decisions that you made throughout your college career, persistence to hunt us down. But one thing I really want to understand is, like, you as a young person growing up in a family where you had, it sounds like, at least a father who was highly entrepreneurial, and maybe your mom as well, because I know a little bit. Any early memories that you'd say, now that I think back on them, they really shine through and define a lot of the reason I became the person that I am, or some of the decisions that I made over my life?
Well, yes. So I'll just start by saying a lot of the memories, unfortunately, were rough ones. You see the full scene of everything, the good, the bad, the ugly. Yeah, and you realize that entrepreneurship is not something that is easily accomplished in a lot of different ways. But what I did, I think, take from seeing my dad go down the route of entrepreneurship was that more so than anything, it's okay to veer off the path of kind of what everyone else is doing. Because growing up in New York City, obviously a lot of my friends' dads worked in traditional finance roles. So my dad was kind of the outlier. And I think, seeing that, whether or not it was successful or not successful while I was growing up, was part of the reason, or probably a big part of the reason why I was so open to taking chances, college, and starting my own businesses, and veering away from the path that a lot of economics majors do, which is, hey, I'm going to, follow this recruiting cycle into investment banking and
Yeah.
blah, 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 blah.
So, and as you think back on those early memories, like, is there one that you remember where you said, oh my gosh, like this is an example of my dad taking a risk, veering off the path. I'm seeing how the sausage is made. Like, I realize what this is and I'm actually attracted to it, but I get it.
So interesting you say that, because one thing about entrepreneurialism that I've realized is that as an entrepreneur, you're always selling. And my dad worked with small businesses back, when I was growing up. His business was largely revolving around onboarding small businesses, namely restaurants, onto his platform. And so we would often go out to dinner or lunches, and then midway through the meal, my dad would get up and try and talk to the owner and try and sell him and try and bring him on board. And like my mom would kind of joke and make fun of him,
Yeah.
as would I. But then you kind of comes full circle, and it's like, yeah, like he was doing his job and he had no other choice to get customers, but always be something.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I can imagine your mom just like, oh gosh.
like here you go, get talking to the waiter, like, where is the owner here in today? Like,
My wife asks me, well, I have similar experiences because I'd like to think I'm just endlessly curious. And having been trained in a lot of these qualitative market research methods, which is a lot of the approach to our investing, whenever we go out, I'm always interested. Like, I want to ask people questions. And Abby's always like, oh God, can we just have a meal where like don't bother people? You don't ask them a bunch of questions.
exactly.
Okay. So entrepreneurial DNA. You watched your father struggle, go off the path when there was obviously a path that he could have taken. And then you talked about sports. And I know that the app that you've worked on is in sports. Sports have played a big role in your life. What is it about sport that that you think is relevant generally to like who you are today?
Yeah, I would say it's relevant to everything I am today, because growing up, again, that was the largest part of my identity, was being an athlete and being a sports fan. And especially my favorite sport growing up was football. And there's something about football that I think is special to all other sports. And it's a couple of different things. One, it's the teamwork, how you need to have 11 people working at the same time. If one person doesn't do their job, the entire team or the entire play falls apart. So there's the teamwork that you learn about it. There's the camaraderie around being part of a team, and like knowing that you need to do your job again to have other people do their job successfully. It's about the relentless pursuit of excellence that you need to have in order to beat the competition. That was incredibly important, right? The coaches that you have are instrumental in getting that mindset into you, and that, hey, if you're going to slack off right now in practice, you're going to get your ass kicked in the game.
Yeah.
And that mentality has not left me since leaving the field. It's like everything I do, I know that if I'm not putting my everything into it, if I'm not striving for excellence, someone out there is, and he's going to beat me.
Yeah. It's funny. I know there's like the sports analogies to startups are hackneyed. Everybody's tired of hearing them. When we ran the incubator at Colgate, people used to ask us, is there anything that you can use as a predictor of who might be successful starting a business in this incubator year to year? And as we look back on it, unfortunately or fortunately, the single biggest predictor was, were they a varsity athlete? And Colgate was Division I, but also like a super rigorous academic institution. And I always reflect on, all right, great. A student was signing up for our incubator, which was a full contact sport. So now you're taking on the role of being a full-time student, a full-time athlete, and a full-time entrepreneur. That's really hard, but what are they good at doing? Managing their time. They know the importance of getting into the gym to lift and get stronger. They know how to work on a team. They know how to be coached. They want to win, but they actually really know what it's like to lose, and that sucks. And then what it's like to come back from a loss. So yeah, I think that there's just so many great examples in sport that translate perfectly, and it's all measurable, right? Like, but you were, were you quarterback?
Yes. I will.
Anything in particular about being quarterback that you think is especially relevant?
I will say two things. One is when things go wrong, it's your fault. And when things go right, you got to give credit to everyone else. I remember once I won Athlete of the Week, and I was the first person in my school to actually not be in a solo photo, but I brought the entire offensive line and with me because my success was only possible because they made it possible. Yeah. So there's that, but then there's also the mind game of playing quarterback that I always loved. Tom Brady, I'm not Tom Brady, I'm not suggesting I am, but he'll always talk about it where like it is a game of chess. You go up to the line of scrimmage and you're looking at the defense, trying to read what they're in, what play call you can make or change to attack that defense that you think they're in. So I've always loved the game of chess that is football, and that's why I loved quarterback is you could kind of move the pawns the way you wanted to.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right, so and for anybody who is watching this, I highly recommend Googling Harry Landis Riverdale, and then going to the image section of Google, and you'll find some good images of Harry on the field. All right, so you finished high school, you went to Duke. When in the journey at Duke did you start? Well, no, there was FAMFL, but there was something you did before FAMFL. What was
Yeah, so my first class that I took in entrepreneurship at Duke was a generalist class. And I would say the main takeaway from this class, and the one thing that I learned was that being an entrepreneur wasn't about building cool things. It was about solving real problems. And so that was the first lesson that I really learned that I didn't understand in high school when I watched my dad do his thing. But when I learned that, me and my friend who were in the same class, we were like, all right, let's think about problems we can solve. And the first one that came to our mind, we had just moved in as freshmen. We're like, how in the hell was there not like a better system in place and help for everyone moving in and carrying these massive bags, organizing their rooms? And we realized that there was regulations in place that prevented third parties, like third-party moving companies, from helping orchestrate and fulfill the move-in, move-out process. We're like, hey, let's build a company that is student-owned, student-run, and for students. We called it Pack Up. We built the website, had all the packages ready to go, figured out all the logistics about, where we're going to store stuff, who's going to be doing the labor, all this type of work. And then we received an email about 1 month before our first move in, move out saying that, hey, we're actually now going to allow third-party players to enter the space and like move in and move out people's belongings. I forget the names of them now, but there's a couple well-established players in the space. So we realized that, the opportunity may have passed us. We didn't even bother going through our first true move in, move out. But it was a great learning experience and like really made us realize how some businesses are really vulnerable to changes in regulation.
I can't help but wonder, was there any other learning in there about how obsessed you were with the problem or not? Because I know you went on to start FANFL, and I know you'd be somebody who is obsessed with sport. If for whatever reason you were just intrinsically obsessed with moving, do you think you might have persisted and said, screw these competitors, we'll beat them?
I do think so. I think part of the reason why it was an easy decision to start down is that we weren't that passionate about moving. Yeah. It was more, hey, we're two college students that think we can make a quick buck solving a problem that other students are facing because we can put it together and make all the logistics work. It wasn't until the second semester, this was because that business was first semester freshman year. It wasn't until second semester where I was enrolled in a entrepreneurship class called sports entrepreneurship that Fanful came along. And it came along because the final project of the class was pitch a business idea. All it needs to do is be revolved around sports. You have to make a deck, problem, solution, value prop, etc. And that's going to be your semester's work, and you're going to present it at the end of the semester. And that was the first time where I really sat and thought about things that I personally had a problem with growing up as a diehard sports fan. And I would always return to this moment that I had in my high school cafeteria where me and my friends were, surrounded around the table arguing who's the bigger fan, who knows more, who deserves more credit for how much they've put into the team, who's more loyal, all these different questions. And it irked me that there was no way to quantify one's level of fandom, right? I could say I'm a big fan, but there was no way to prove it. So at the time, I was like, there's a gap in the market here because I'm surely not the only fan that is bothered by this. I want to build a business that is able to effectively track, recognize, and reward one's level of fandom so that fans can get what they deserve. And that was the kernel of inspiration that became Fanful. Happy to go through all the different twists and turns.
That's just about that for sure.
But that was the inspiration. I pitched it at the end. I think it was received well. And really nothing at that point could stop me. I was determined of bringing this product to market.
Yeah.
And
I mean, there's nothing, it seems so obvious, but I've come around to this. I'd say more recently, there's nothing like somebody having a chip on their shoulder about something to be the fuel that drives them even through the darkest hours to say, no, I'm still going to solve this damn thing. And I know you've gone through some of that. Tell us quickly about what Fanful is, and then maybe like what you did that was probably totally wrong and sounds like every classic entrepreneurial story that led to a trough of despair and then finding like
yep,
a hope or a reason to believe coming out of all that.
I'll try my best. So the beginning, right, as I just explained, the premise of the idea was let's find a way to track, recognize, and reward one's level of fandom. And the best way I thought I could do that was partnering with the teams themselves so that we could offer an app experience of fans that aggregated everything they would want in one place, gamify the experience so that fans could earn points and redeem them on prizes and, rise leaderboards, all that good stuff. Very quickly, I found out that as an 18 or 19-year-old at that time, that pitching to professional sports teams this idea was a lost cause. They said, you love where your head's at, but you're too young and you're not proven, you haven't had any proof of concept. We suggest you go downstream to the minor leagues and start there. But at the time, my ego was really big. I was like, this idea is too big, too grand for that. Let's just go B2C. Let's try and compete with ESPN. And instead of being like ESPN, let's make it this gamified, rewards-driven fan engagement experience. So for the next year, and I raised a little bit of friends and family capital. I got admitted into an accelerator program and took a gap semester to pursue this idea. And again, it's this B2C fan engagement platform, similar to ESPN, but with a particular edge on gamification and loyalty rewards. During that year, I was caught up in the pressure of having a great launch, and I kept on delaying the launch to add more and more features in it. Features that I weren't even asking people if they really cared about, losing the core of what made Fanful. So I would see, another sports app do something. I was like, we need that in the app. Or I'd see, Bleacher Report add something. I was like, oh, that's really cool. We need that in the app. And the app that Fanful became, this B2C app that again was trying to compete with ESPN, it ended up being a jack of all trades, master of none.
Yeah.
Not only that, but it was really confusing for any new user to go onto it and feel like they had any clue what to do. Nonetheless, it failed disastrously. And like what I learned from that was less is more oftentimes. When you launch something, less is more. You do not want to overwhelm the user. You want to be very pinpointed and clear on what the value proposition is and create a user experience that is honed in around that. You also don't want to build anything and waste money on things that you haven't tested and gotten or proved the assumptions that you're making true on. But yeah, that was the first iteration of Fanful, and it failed. And this is now the end of my junior year.
So you'd just taken, is this towards the end of taking your year off?
So this was, I took my sophomore second semester off to hone in on the idea and build out the B2C user experience. And then I used junior year to get admitted into the accelerator program, raise a small friends and family round. And throughout junior year, I was working on this and bringing, the product to life, launching. I originally had an October launch date. It ultimately launched in March of my junior year. And I was multitasking at school during that entire period of time.
And so, I mean, it's such a classic story, right? So you've wasted time, capital, creative energy. It's a total failure.
And most of all, it was the most humbling thing that could have ever happened.
And so now you've been fully punched in the gut. And I used to always think about this with the students that were in our incubators. Like one of our mentors, Bob Gold, he would say entrepreneurship actually only starts when the cash register rings, for like when somebody takes action. Like that's real entrepreneurship. When you sell something, everything before that is just kind of like tinkering and playing around. So you haven't gotten to that cash register moment yet. But right now I'm guessing is when that's going to be the real make or break moment of do you actually have entrepreneurial instincts? So what happened?
Yeah. So I was faced with an inflection point, right? I could either call it quits and say, hey, look, I gave it my best bet, or I could find a way to keep it going and try and take everything that I've learned over the past year and a half and, use that into creating a better Fanful product. And what I realized was that I could do that by doing two things. One is returning back to the B2B model, because the problem or the experience I was building for fans leaned more to the nice to have than the hair on fire problem that you often need to grow a business, especially a new one. But I realized there was a hair on fire problem for the teams themselves, because all these teams had team apps. So like if you're a fan of the New York Giants has an app, but nobody uses them. I asked hundreds of people, do you use, your favorite team's app? And they said no. Like this is a problem for teams, because you're losing the data, the revenue, the loyalty to all these third-party platforms that you don't own or control. So the idea was like, all right, let's return back to B2B and let's try and partner with teams. But now that I'm humbled and my ego is shrunk, I'm going to go downstream and actually try and work with these minor leagues and get proof of concept. What I realized is that even to get proof of concept, or even to partner with the minor league teams, you had to get proof of concept through an unofficial beta. So the next 6 months, I kind of took what I learned about building a user experience and made a super simple application that did two things, really. It allowed fans to post about the team, and we did this for an unofficial app for Duke Blue Devils. We allowed the fans to post about the team. We aggregated posts from Instagram, X, and news articles from online into one feed. And when you engaged in the feed, you'd earn points that you can spend on raffle entries for prizes like $5 gift cards.
Okay.
Way more simple than what I originally had. No official partnership with Duke. And when we launched, and it was a way shorter development cycle. When we launched, within a month and a half, we had over 1,000 downloads, 36,000 engagements, $1,000 transacted in our like gamified, in a gamified shopping store, made tens of fans really happy and like made their days with giving them cool prizes. Met with some users who were like, this is my favorite app on my phone. And like, I finally felt the validation that like, yeah, this was like what I was trying to do from day one. And it was a relief to finally have that feeling of like, we did it.
Cool.
It was the beginning, because then we took those results and began our first sales cycle of trying to identify our first minor league partner. It actually only took one call. We found a team called the Phoenix Rising FC, which is a tier 2 MLS club. And within one conversation, they're like, wow, this data is impressive. We love the way this app looks and feels. Let's run it for our fan base. And it's launching in a couple of weeks. Very excited for
I
it.
can't wait to see. I mean, I think what attracted us most to you, among many of the things that you've just said, is like the sheer persistence, the fact that you've been an operator, and we have a team full of operators. People have built things, gotten punched in the gut, gotten back up again. Because, I think much like the startups that we work with, we're building a firm, and that's very entrepreneurial as well. And every day we get punched in the gut and we have to get back up again, and we have ideas, and then we try to go validate them in the market. And sometimes we're dead wrong. And then it's like, how do you deal with that? So that was definitely like one of the areas that we were most attracted in you when we met. All right. So while you were at college, you had Pack Up, Fanful, and I know that you also, like, there's that expression, you want to figure out how to find time in the day, ask a busy person. So you started Pack Up. You were at Duke, academically very rigorous. You started Fanful, and I know that you were also involved with Duke Capital Partners. Tell us about, so that's the venture, or tell us about Duke Capital Partners.
Yeah. So, well, right before I launched Duke My Team, which was the unofficial Fanful app for Duke, I really wanted to start planning for life outside of Fanful, because I was, again, with now my ego strong and realizing that this might not be the $1 billion business that I could live for like the rest of my life on. I wanted to work in something close to the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So the first thing I did was found an internship at Branded Hospitality in the summer of going into my senior year.
And they were a venture capital.
They were a venture capital firm that focused on hospitality solutions and software. But then that following fall, I was the first undergrad to join Duke Capital Partners, which is ever.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
It's their formal venture capital branch, and at the time it was only a graduate associate program. They wanted to get some guinea pigs to see if this would work with some undergrads. So it was me and one other person that were the first two ever.
What did you do to convince them to pick you?
It really was the Fanful experience, if anything. It was like,
you had a story to tell.
I had a story to tell, exactly. And then a little bit of the Branded Hospitality.
Okay.
It's like I have a little bit of experience in venture capital.
I mean, what year was this? Junior year?
This is now beginning of my senior year.
I mean, for a senior in college, you call it a little. I think you had a lot of experience.
Yeah. I mean, I had 3 years of entrepreneurship at that point under my belt and one internship.
Yeah. All right. So now you work with Duke Capital Partners. What was that? What would you do there?
Yeah. So I'd actually talk about both Branded Hospitality and Duke Capital Partners in contrast. At Branded Hospitality, they were focused on fundraising. So that summer was really about learning how a fund prepares and builds a deck to raise for a fund. And then Duke Capital Partners, on the other hand, the bread and butter and really the true value it provides associates is two-phase. The first is you sit in on all the different screenings, like the pitches that they hear from startups. And at the end of every pitch, you have their version of general partners, like the leaders of the program, kind of walk through, what they liked about it, what they didn't like, and had the associates ask questions, offer feedback, what they thought about it. And it was just an invaluable experience to start to gain like an understanding about how to evaluate different businesses. Like, it was the first time that I understood that it wasn't just about a problem or a solution, but it was also about market size. It was about the founding team. Is there a fit between the founder and the product that they're looking to build? Are the terms that they're asking for reasonable? And so I started to gain the lingo of like what a venture capital firm really runs on. And so that was the Duke Capital Partners experience in a nutshell. It was like gaining experience and hearing pitches and being able to form thoughts and opinions on those pitches, as well as like actually being able to start working and functioning within a venture capital environment.
What have you observed? Because, I mean, in a relatively short professional career, you've had a lot of experience. And to the point now where, to your point, you're already starting to form like real strong points of view about things. And you've also lived your own entrepreneurial experience. What are some of those early points of views that you've developed now that are core to how you think about investing or building a company? What's necessary versus nice to have? Anything that comes to mind immediately?
One thing that comes to mind me, and this is just from my own PTSD of being a founder of Fanful and how I failed, it's like I have PTSD around companies that are trying to be a jack of all trades rather than be a 10x in something very specific. I think it's very difficult to try and claim you do everything and nothing the best, rather than saying, I'm going to do this the best for you and nothing else, and then start, building out auxiliary services down the road once you have the customers hooked. That's one thing.
Have you already seen that with companies that we're looking at?
Yeah, I think it resonates a lot with one of our core theses, which is before we invest in a company, we need to know this company has a wedge into owning the customer. And by wedge, we mean like there's this one thing that they do really well that the customer is really addicted to.
Yeah.
And we don't really care about, the second best thing or third best thing they do. It's like, what is that one thing that you can really speak to that, the customer will resonate with?
Yeah. I guess like just to build on that too, in theory, because if you do that, you'll earn the right to be able to do more and more and more things for that customer. They'll trust you, right? All right. So that's one thing. Anything else that jumps to mind?
Well, there's also that's as it relates to like a company feature. I think I also have started to build very strong opinions around founding teams, because you realize, especially the more that I've seen pitches, a lot of companies claim to do the same things. You hear a lot of companies that are just like, again, in the same industry, trying to go after the same customers. And you hear the expression growing up, it's like not the idea, it's the execution. I'd argue it's not the idea and it's not just the execution, but it's like, who is executing it? Because it's like, you can have two companies that have the same idea, who have the same strategy of execution, but there's only going to be one winner. And I think having a founding team that is relentless in everything they do, we call it bank robber mentalities, but the relentless in everything they do, they don't take no for an answer. They're always selling. And one thing I like to feel is when I'm on a pitch, do I want to come work for the person within 30 seconds after listening to them? Like, I need to feel that motivated.
Yeah.
Because everything is about, like, everything you do as a startup or as a founder is selling. You have to sell your vision to potential employees. You have to sell it to investors, to sell to customers. Everything revolves around being able to sell. And you can tell from, I think, the winning teams versus the losing teams, one consistent characteristic in the winning teams is that they are relentless about selling, and they're good at it.
Yeah, they'll go to the end of the earth to figure something out.
Yeah.
So you formed at least, and I'm sure there's more, 2 points of view. It seems as though these are things that you've arrived at through your own struggles, trying to build things, or through just lots and lots of watching the movie and observing patterns. Something that you and I have been talking about is, and we're always trying to poke holes in, what did we miss? What did we learn? How do we not repeat that mistake? And one of the things that you and I are talking about is like, how do you operationalize all these learnings? Because the last thing you want to do is make the same mistake like 4 years later and you're like, oh, we did that same thing. But there's so many different lenses to look through. And oftentimes, like if you have 100 lenses to look through, you forget to look at 5 of them. And maybe the answer is you don't have 100 lenses, have 3. But just, you have any early thoughts? Because one of the projects that we're working on is how to operationalize these learnings. Any thoughts on like how to operationalize these learnings to make sure we don't repeat the same mistake?
I have one thought, and this is a common theme of thought that I have, not just across operationalizing learnings, but in everything that I do. And it's about being a very effective prioritizer. And what I mean by that is there's always going to be 5 to 10 things that you want to do. We might have 5 things we want to operationalize at any given time. The most important practice, I believe, is identifying first, what is the most important thing we need to operationalize? Because when you have focus, then you can set a game plan to actually doing it. It's much tougher when you're like, we need to operationalize these 5 things, because then each gets 20% of your effort. And we have all other things that are going on, but you get 20% of your effort in this domain of operationalizing earnings. So what I always like to do, and I was going to talk about this, I think, in another question, but I'm very big on let's focus on, or let's try and spend significant energy on realizing what is most important. And once we do, then we can create a game plan for attack. That's how I think about it.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'm going to hold you to task on that for us. Because Andy has the expression, there's 10 balls in the air, but 2 of them cannot afford to hit the floor.
Right.
I think, when you go through that exercise of focus and prioritization, it's usually pretty obvious to figure out what are the 2 balls that can't hit the floor. The next question is, are we actually prioritizing those or not?
Right. And once you save those 2 balls,
Yep.
then you're dealing with 8, and you can focus. All right, what are these, out of these 8, what are the last 2 that we don't want in the floor, and you can get to them.
I have 2 last questions. You've been with TI Ventures now for about a month, a little over a month. Any early observations, good, bad, the ugly, in your new role? Things that you have taken out of this first month of work that you'd say, oh, this is worth mentioning?
So one thing that I realized, and this is the first time out of my 3 kind of venture capital experiences between Branded, Duke, and now TIA, this is the first time I really dove into the weeds of like the firm economics. And what has struck me as like very challenging is like how the fund economics actually work out, and that you raise X, 0.2 of X goes into management fees, and then you're dealing with 0.8 to raise into a multiple of X. This is bad for that. That is one thing. It's like the fund economics is way harder than I had ever thought it would be. And that's something that has been eye-opening.
I actually, just on that point, I think, anybody could go out on the internet and read how do funds work. I think too infrequently do people actually do that, especially startups that say, oh, I just want to go raise venture capital because they view it as free. The truth is it's actually super costly capital. If anything, it really forces you to realize, what do these companies actually have to do?
Yeah.
And why are the stakes so high, and why is there so much pressure
And
on everyone?
And not only that, but one thing I've noticed is that some investments that are quote unquote your best investments, meaning you get in at $6 million valuation and today it's worth $500 million. The way dilution works, if you can't participate in follow-on rounds, it's like you found this company at its baby stages. It's now in the Hall of Fame and you've only 6x'd your original investment.
Right.
It's a brutal world. It's a brutal world.
Any other early observations in the first month of work that strike you worth mentioning?
Yeah, one thing I've noticed and was really surprised about was how difficult it is to actually gather data on our portfolio companies and like the most recent KPIs, because none of that is public. It's not published online somewhere where you can quickly retrieve it. So it's a bit of a game of cat and mouse, and that was not something that I expected. And it's certainly a challenge because as a member of a fund, you want to have as up to date, as accurate information as possible. And believe it or not, it's not that easy.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's something that we deal with every day because you have a portfolio of 20 companies, and it's like you want to keep real-time information on what's happening with them all. At the same time, if you had a portfolio of 20 kids, you're like, how the heck could I know what's going on with all my kids at any given time? I think that point dovetails with some of the themes that we've been thinking around just about data in general, like data, whether or not it's available, in Charlie's terms, interoperable, is it clean, apples to apples, organized or not? And our view is like, actually the most important data that's going to be driving industries for the next 10 years is all the stuff that's sitting on the private side or within business silos that's preventing everybody from doing way more interesting things with it, let alone letting the AI feed on it and use it as its oxygen. And, in our industry, it's a great example of that. Like there is an availability of data it's not only about availability, it's that it's not like apples to apples. Last question. We have the benefit of having somebody on the team now in you and in Alara who are under 30 years old. You're how old? 22?
22.
22. Any observations about us older folk? I'm 40 now, but I still think of myself as 18 in here. As you work with us on the team, even again, maybe even in the last month, that you'd say, oh, I have a point of view here just as a 22-year-old that's actually super relevant that you all are missing. Has that come up yet for you?
I wouldn't say you guys are missing, but there's some things that I think I believe more firmly just growing up as a Gen Zer that you guys probably think about but don't realize how scalable.
What's like an immediate example of that?
An immediate example is one, how important beautiful design is. We're a generation that grew up on Apple, and everything that we do and touch needs to not only look beautiful, but
Be
be effortless,
Yeah.
and the user experience has to feel incredibly intuitive.
Yeah.
Because another thing is our attention spans are so short that if something is requiring, serious mental energy to feel to onboard, we're not going to give that a chance.
Have you seen that in any pitches where you're immediately like, oh yeah, this has it versus this doesn't have it?
I think it's definitely easier to notice when something doesn't have it. Because if you're trying to pitch it and as an investor, you're sitting there and you're like, I'm not fully following this. That means you're going to have difficulty onboarding, a customer who has half the time and energy that we do.
Yeah.
Half as generous. So there's that. But there's also some examples where, we've been pitched companies that do feel like they've prioritized onboarding as part of their experience. And because of that, it makes it an easier investment.
Harry, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Of course.